Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Nothing good happens after 2 a.m. One night 3 years ago, I got into a fight with my girlfriend at the time. In my rage, I stormed out of her house, got into my truck, and then just started driving. I hopped on the interstate and drove, and about an hour later, I was in Nashville, but I was still so pissed I decided to keep driving. I made it my goal to reach Kentucky and then turn around. I'd never been to Kentucky before, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, and when I reached there, it was about 2:30 in the morning, having left my town a little after 12:30. I grabbed a Coke and a biscuit from the first McDonald's I found, and then headed back to Alabama. As I was heading back, I realized I was running low on gas as I got to Nashville, so I pulled off Interstate 65, went down the off-ramp and hit a light. I made a left and hit another light. And here's where it gets weird. As I pulled up to this light, I noticed something strange. The only car on the road was stopped at the green light to the right. Weird, I thought, but hey, it's after 3 at this point. The guy could be tired. Once I reached the red light, however, the car rolled forward through the light and under the overpass for the interstate. And then I saw its brake lights on, and their headlights go out. They stopped under the overpass, and my heart started to race. I was sitting in the turning lane waiting for the light, and the gas station was right past the overpass, and that's where they were there waiting for me. I was freaking out. I watched my light turn green, then back to red. I was waiting to see if he would move, but they didn't. Finally, when the light switched to green again, I flicked on my high beams and crept through the intersection trying to make out their face, but I couldn't. Then, lo and behold, as soon as I passed them, their headlights turned on and they started moving again. At this point, I was scared shitless, staring at the headlights in my rearview mirror instead of the road, as I made the couple hundred of feet to the gas station. Thankfully, when I pulled in, the first thing I noticed was a cop car parked out front. So, I parked at the pump, and as I was getting out, I watched the car pull into the station and park. I started pumping my gas, and as soon as I was doing so, I watched a man exit the vehicle and start to walk inside the store. The whole time from the second his head popped out of the car to when he made it inside the store, he was staring at me, smiling like the soldier in that famous picture who was suffering from shell shock, and he was shaking his head left to right. He walked into the store and got in line right behind the cop. Now, maybe I've been watching too many movies, but the whole time he was standing there, I thought he was going to kill the cop, and thankfully he didn't. Once I had enough gas to get home, I stopped pumping, jumped in my car, and double-checked my phone for directions back to the interstate. As I was leaving the gas station, though, I noticed the man leave his place in line and run out of the store. That's when I panicked and I hit the gas. I ran the red light at the overpass, ran another red light, and then got back onto the interstate. I went about 85 to 90 miles an hour all the way home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. Still, one of the creepiest things to ever happen to me, and it reiterated to me what the detective told all incoming freshmen at orientation. Nothing good happens after 2 a.m. Crazy Road Trip, submitted by Haru Black. Here's something that happened to me and 2 other friends a couple of years back. Sorry it's so long, but it takes place over the course of a week. It was a pretty messed up road trip, and we didn't realize how scary it was until a few years later, because the entire time we were very, very high. It was March 2014, and my friends and I'll call them Steve and Karen, had just started a band together. I'm a guy who was pretty outgoing and friendly, and Steve was a quiet kid who was pretty masculine, or at least thought he was. He came from a suburban town in Cape Cod where he was valedictorian and also the class clown. Karen was a small, dirty blonde, pretty shy and quiet, but very friendly. An ex-scene kid like me, we both had hair over our eyes. Steve and Karen were in the beginnings of a relationship. We were in college and spring break was coming up soon. We had no plans, so we decided we were going to drive from Massachusetts to Florida to do some camping in some national forests, and then drive to New Orleans if we had the time. We weren't really experienced campers or road trippers, but we were depressed 19-year-olds who felt pretty invincible and had nothing better to do, so we figured, what the hell. That Sunday night, Karen had gotten us our first show in her home state of Connecticut, and I'm pretty sure we left right after. The ride down was nice, but an exhausting 24 hours. We got to Florida on Monday night around 1 a.m., tired as hell. We were so tired, and we'd been smoking, we didn't even try to find a campground. We pulled over and set up the tent in a slightly wooded area about 10 feet off the road. When we woke up and left the tent, we realized we'd actually been camping in a ditch, which we thought was pretty funny. We made it our goal that day to find a real campsite. Of course, we'd been smoking, and while we were at a gas station, Karen decided she was just going to go into the convenience store and ask people about any good camping spots. She came out having spoken to 2 rednecks who said they could lead us to some really good spots. Again, we were pretty high and thought, hey, this is great. The locals will definitely show us the best spots. We followed their pickup truck, smoking a bit more, until we ended up in the woods near a slow, shallow river. We got out, and they started telling us about what a great campsite this was in their thick Hick accents. We've got a lot of firewood, they said. We've been cutting it up, and we'd be happy to share it. You can swim right over there, but don't go out too far. There's gators out here. They were really trying to sell us this campsite. I thought the shorter redneck was kind of hot, chubby with a beard. You can ask my friends. I'm pretty much a bad man detector. If you think a guy is attractive or get a crush on one, you should run far away. I went up to Steve while they were talking to Karen about sharing food or something. We should, tell them we're going to go get firewood or something and just not come back, I said. He agreed, too high to remember the firewood they just offered to share with us 10 minutes before, and we used that same excuse. In the car, Karen said she'd been feeling weird about the way they were talking to her too, and was glad we'd come up with some way to slip away. Wouldn't it be so funny if we looked back and they were just following us? I said, trying to be funny. Don't even fucking joke about that, Karen said. Then I said, guys, looking back. Sure enough, there was the dirty old pickup truck, not 50 feet behind us. Super freaked out, we drove around making a lot of sharp turns. They kept up, though stayed at a distance. It had been a few hours of us frantically driving, and the sun had set, and we thought we'd lost them in the dark. It was probably around 10 at night or so when we found a campground you had to pay for, but we couldn't find anywhere to pay, so we just drove in, found a nice spot, and set up camp. We hadn't actually gotten any firewood, so super high, Karen and I set out into the dark to find anything we could burn. We kept joking about how the rednecks were going to jump out and get us, but Karen really started freaking out, saying, "Oh my God, we're so far from the campsite. We're lost. We're never going to find our way back, and the rednecks are going to find us and kill us." I reassure her and say, "Dude, we're literally 20 feet from the car. Look, the trees aren't even that thick. We can still see it." Yeah, we were high. We gathered a bunch of logs and some branches from trees that kind of looked like palm trees but were short and grew like bushes. We got back, and Steve had already started the fire with things that he'd found, so we broke out some sausages and cooked them over the fire and drank an entire bottle of wine. Extremely hungover, we got some groceries in the morning, and I got sick after eating an entire thing of birthday cake Oreos. Just before sunset, we found another campsite on the outskirts of the Ocala forest, about 100 feet from a road. We could see car headlights going by through the trees, and there were occupied campsites around, so we felt pretty safe. We smoked some more, made some food, and I was surprised I could still get some cell service, and I used the super slow internet on my phone to look up scary stories specifically about the Ocala forest. I found some stories about the Rainbow People, a supposed cult that lived in the Ocala forest and tried to make other people live there too. It didn't seem that scary, so we were disappointed after having waited about 10 minutes for the website to load. And suddenly, we heard a creak in the woods, just outside the light of the fire. We didn't think much of it until we heard a bunch more, all around us. It sounded like footsteps on the leaves. As always, very high, we started freaking out. We didn't think the rednecks would have followed us this far, but we still weren't sure. And having just watched the Blair Witch Project together a few weeks before, I joked, maybe it's the Ocala Witch. Steve told us to wait at the fire while he went to the car and turned the headlights on. Karen and I stood back to back with our pocket knives out, still not knowing if we were freaking out for no reason. Once Steve got the headlights on and drove closer to us, we got in and he did some donuts while we looked around to make sure everything was clear. When we were sure there wasn't anyone there, we joked more about this Ocala Witch and decided it was time to just go to sleep. We poured some water on the fire and got in the tent. We'd been laying in our sleeping bags for about 10 minutes when we noticed some light to the side of the tent. Our fire had started back up, and we were pretty freaked out since we dumped most of our water on it. The fire started to grow, and it got pretty big. "Is anybody going to go check on the Ocala Witch?" I said, looking over to Karen and Steve, who both looked at me and nodded no. Too scared to leave the tent, we eventually fell asleep, and when we woke up, the fire pit was still smoking, and it was completely ash. I mean, maybe it's explainable, but we were pretty scared at the time because some of the ash was a very distinct shade of blue. Steve tied some sticks together into figures and put them around the campsite to freak us out while we were packing up. Real funny. That night, we decided to go deeper into Ocala. We were driving around the forest looking for a camping spot while I was reading stories about the skunk ape that I'd loaded onto my phone in advance. Of course, we were still smoking, and it was pretty late, really dark, and we were tired. We started to think we might have gone too deep to find a campsite, but the path was wide enough for a car, so why wouldn't there be a good spot? We came upon a line of cars in the middle of the forest, mostly looking pretty broken down with some graffiti on them. We kept going, and soon there were a bunch of people walking around. We drove up to one of them, a very tall, very bearded man who could have been the skunk ape himself. Rolling the window down just enough to talk to him, I asked, "Hey, what is this?" "A gathering," he said abruptly, with a really deep voice. "Of what?" I asked, confused. "Of people." We'd managed to stumble upon the Rainbow Gathering, the cult we read about the night before. Turns out, they were just hundreds of hippies living in the woods and were very hospitable. One guy, whose name I can't remember, decided to show us around, and he was really nice and introduced us to a bunch of people. The greeting and farewell was, "Lovin' you." He introduced us to his wife, who was pregnant with their 7th child. Everyone, again, was really nice. They taught us all about how they lived in the woods. If you got lost at night, you yelled, "Hey, I need an adult!" and someone would come find you. If you needed tobacco, you yelled, "Nick at night!" and there was a group that would come and give you some. They called lighters fire dragons, the outside world Babylonia, and didn't trade with money, which they referred to as Babylonian tickets, but rather they traded shiny rocks and pretty stuff. We were really high and having a lot of fun. They got us some food and took us to a drum circle, and they were all over the forest, sometimes 10 or 15-minute walks between sites. We knew it was a little weird, but we decided to go along with it. At one point, an old guy had Karen in his lap next to a bonfire, sipping on some mystery liquid from a thermos, but she seemed happy, so we didn't think much of it. We also met the one black hippie who was there, who only beatboxed, and he never spoke. We hung out with them for a couple of more hours before we got tired. And there were different camps throughout the forest, and our guide led us to his, which was called Camp Shut the Fuck Up. It was the quiet camp for all the parents with kids. We set up our tent and went to sleep. I woke up first and read a book in the tent since it was raining. By the time Karen and Steve woke up, the rain had stopped, and we went to hang out with some of the people at Camp Shut the Fuck Up. We talked with them for a little while and listened to their stories. Someone was talking pretty casually about how a girl had been dosed at another camp, and she was going crazy or something. We figured out through the context clues that dosed meant someone had given her a large amount of acid without her knowledge, and she understandably freaked out. We realized how weird the whole thing was and decided it was time to pack up and leave. As we were taking down the tent, we started to hear it. "You're doing it wrong." We heard people chanting. Not in unison, but randomly, one after another. We looked back, and there were a few people walking towards us. "You're doing it wrong," they kept shouting. We continued to dismantle the tent while one of them approached us. "You guys are packing up after only one night?" Karen replied, "Yeah, we want to get to New Orleans today." The guy replied, "No, you guys should stay longer. We've been living here for months. Gotta stay away from Babylonia. All that shit rots your brain." When we weren't receptive, they started getting more aggressive. "Check out these Babylonians. You're doing it wrong." I looked at him and said, "Dude, we have to be back at school in like 3 days." Someone from the back of the growing group of hippies between us and the path of Camp Shut the Fuck Up yelled out, "Quit school! Come live in the woods with us!" Someone else shouted, "Someone get the duct tape!" Karen got mad and started arguing with them about us going to school. They were saying that we weren't doing anything by going to Babylonian school. And Karen argued that we were going to school so we could learn what we needed to actually make change in the world instead of just sitting in the forest and doing acid and littering. Finally, after what seemed like an hour with all these people yelling at us, we finished packing up the tent, and Karen had convinced some of them that we were on the same side and just doing it different ways. I think she just outsmarted them, really. And they let us through, and our guide let us out of the forest, apologizing for the rest of them. "You're lucky we didn't duct tape you to a tree," someone shouted. It was about a half-hour walk back to the car, and whenever someone saw us with all of our gear, they shouted, "You're doing it wrong," or "Hey, have fun in Babylonia." We finally got to the forest entrance, and we met our guide's wife again, still very pregnant. She looked each of us in the eyes, smiled at us, and put her hands on our shoulders, and hugged us as if to say, "I'm glad you're getting out. I wish I could too." We drove to a park on the coast where manatees were supposed to swim, but I guess it was the wrong time of the year, so we just drove through a weird suburban island town before heading to New Orleans. We got there pretty late, and we were again exhausted. We couldn't find anywhere to set up camp because we were in a city, and we didn't really think this through. We found a lawn between a stadium and its parking lot, and Steve wanted to sleep in the tent, but Karen and I thought it was too cold and we should just sleep in the car. Steve still set up the tent, determined to sleep in it, and because they were kind of together, Karen decided she would too. I woke up to a flashlight blinding my face and someone banging on the window. I open the door and instantly the alarm goes off. There's 2 cops standing there, bewildered, asking me where the keys were so I could turn off the alarm, and I pointed to the tent about 10 feet away. Meanwhile, in the tent, the alarm had woken Steve and Karen up, and they thought someone had broken into the car, and if it hadn't been for the fact that I was in it, they would have been too scared to come out of the tent. However, they unzipped the tent with their knives ready, only to see the 2 cops. The cops called them over, asked to see all of our IDs, and asked what we were doing so far from home. We told them that we just didn't have anything else to do for spring break. They ran our IDs, and they said it was cold and that Steve and Karen could go back to the tent and I could go back in the car while they did it. Okay, I'm black and frequented Tumblr, where I had heard about police brutality and the latest minority killing by a cop on a daily basis. Oh God, we're in Louisiana. They're separating us because they're going to shoot me, I thought. Steve and Karen back in the tent had similar thoughts. They knocked down the window and called my friends from the tent, and luckily they didn't kill me. They told us to be safe, and then they went on their way. The rest of the trip was fine. We walked around New Orleans and hung out with some homeless travel kids on a pier. I bought them whiskey, and we thought it was funny that I was the only one that didn't need a chaser. Just as the sun was setting, we took off to make the day-and-a-half drive back home. And we made it back just in time to go to sleep and get up for school the next day. We were super lucky. I mean, the only reason we weren't more scared or observant was because we were high the entire time. A couple of years later, again, while high, we recounted the events to each other and realized just how dumb we'd been. We may laugh about it now, but there were so many times on that trip where things could have gone horribly wrong. Don't sleep on the side of the road. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day, and most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the really creepy ones you see in a lot of movies. Anyway, I've been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you suddenly just become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. After it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass behind some bushes to try and hide my car from anyone else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I just made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound again. It was now around 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that maybe it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratches the couple's car and then slaughters the guy when he gets out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door open. I slowed down just to look to see if there was anyone in there, and there wasn't. And then I looked in my rearview mirror again. At first I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy came sprinting around the corner. He was screaming at me, shouting stuff like, "Hey, you, get the fuck out of your car now!" I noped the fuck out of there and sped off, and I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. He's getting closer. When I was younger, each summer and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip, when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning, so around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour, and we still had a few more hours to drive, and I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was around me, because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. "A lot of cars use this road," he said. "He's probably going to Reynosa or another city." And he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. And by this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car too, and entertained ourselves with watching it through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. But we got pretty tired pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother said, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel," she finally said. And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and this car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to turn its brights on, like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And my dad did. The car kept driving, and I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as my dad parked the car right in front of him. He came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us, and how it was taunting us. The policeman took her claim seriously and told us that people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals all the time. He then offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. So, relieved, we drove off with the police cruiser behind us, until about 10 minutes later when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's word and my mother's worst fears. That 10 minutes later, we saw the same car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting for us. Driving Cross Country, submitted by Terry from the Block. Back in 2009, I decided I was tired of my day job and wanted a change of scenery from the cold doldrums of Newark, New Jersey. I spoke with some friends from college that were living in San Francisco, and they convinced me to go out west too. I could crash with them as long as I liked until I found a job. So, from Thanksgiving time to March, I saved all of my money, did the nothing but ramen thing, then loaded up my hand-me-down Ford Explorer and planned my drive across the states. My father had bought me a Thule carrier for the roof, so with my little U-Haul trailer, I had everything all set to go, and I planned on sleeping in the back of the Explorer a couple of nights to save money. I didn't tell anyone I was going to do that, let alone my parents, who would have freaked out at that possibility. Before I go any further, I should let everyone know that I'm a petite female, 5'5", and weigh about 110 pounds. I was an avid runner back then and still am now, and was and am in very good shape if I do say so myself. I did a lot of kickboxing and training at the gym, so I thought if I did get into trouble, I'd be able to take care of myself. Back to the story. My plan was to head south first and then drive across through Tennessee, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona, and then head up through Southern California. It was adding about 10 hours of time to the drive, but I figured I'd stop and see things on the way and just kind of take my time. On my first leg, I drove to Roanoke, Virginia, and stopped for the night. Not a problem at all. I found a hotel that seemed like a decent spot to park in for the night, and then I walked to a local restaurant, got something to eat, cleaned up in their bathroom, and then crashed in my truck listening to the rain on the roof. The next day, I made for Memphis, and I figured I'd stop there, maybe see Graceland, and then get a room for the night, and that's exactly what I did. About 9 hours on the road, and I was getting sick of being in the car, and I drove by Graceland. It was too late to stop in, so I found myself at a Motel 6, and here is where the trouble began. Right away, I knew something was wrong with the place. I mean, it was seedy, and I mean seedy. What can you expect from a place like that, right? But it wasn't until too late that I thought something was wrong. I got some more food and found that the back door to the building wasn't locked at all. I mean, it was wide open. Some security. I went to the front desk to tell them that this was unacceptable, but no one there spoke very good English, and I just gave up and went to my room and turned all the locks I could on and then pushed a chair up against the door. I knew what kinds of people were probably staying at a cheap-ass joint like this. The next morning, I got up early, showered, and was going to get on the road right away. But there was an issue. There was this guy standing by my truck looking into the windows. Not being a shy girl, I walked right up to him and asked him what he was doing. He jumped a little and then turned around. Then he smiled at me and said he liked my truck. I said, "That's nice," and then asked him to back away from it and told him that I was in a hurry. I took a good look at him as he stepped away with his hands up to his chest. "Sorry, pretty lady. No offense. Hey, can I buy you breakfast?" he asked. He was about 6 feet tall, dark hair, dark complexion, thin and not unattractive, but he just seemed weird. I mean, staring into my truck like he was going to break into it and then ask me to breakfast just made things even stranger. I politely said, "No thanks," and just got behind the wheel and started to drive off. He sort of stood off to the side and waved at me, and I watched him continue to look at me in my side view mirror. Oh well, I thought as I pulled onto the road, some local goofball, whatever. I stopped for gas and got back on the highway and put some miles in. I finally stopped in Sallisaw, Oklahoma to stretch, get some food and gas, and my friend Gene called me and asked where I was, and we chatted for a few minutes, and while I sat in my truck eating, I looked over and couldn't believe my eyes. Standing by the edge of the parking lot next to a dirty white car was the guy from the Memphis parking lot. He was looking at a map spread out onto the hood of his car, but every once in a while, he looked up at me, or at least in the direction of my truck. He couldn't see me face to face, but he was definitely looking in my direction. I told Jean about him, and she said I was probably mistaken and was just creeped out about the meeting that I had with him in the morning. When I looked over again, the car was there, but the guy wasn't. I agreed with Jean that it was probably just a silly coincidence, and maybe it was just someone else that looked like that guy. Got some more gas, and then got back on the interstate. I wasn't tired, and after one or two more pit stops, I made it to Amarillo and planned on sleeping in the back of the truck again. I wrote an email to my parents saying something about how fast it went from being the start of spring in one area to the brown of Texas in the next instant. I was shot, so I drifted away and didn't wake up until about 2 in the morning. That's when I heard something right outside of my truck. I was parked in an Embassy Suites this time to avoid the creep factor or a cheap place, but that didn't help things at all. I opened my eyes to see a flashlight pointing in on me, and I immediately screamed. The light didn't go out for a second, and I thought maybe it was hotel security or the police. But then the light turned off, and whoever was out there bumped the side of my truck as they turned around, and I saw a tall, dark shape run away, and then under a parking lot light. Yeah, it looked like that guy. I freaked out, scrambled to put my sneakers on. I was only wearing a t-shirt and a pair of Umbro soccer shorts, and I felt so violated and naked, wondering how long that person was staring in at me. I thought of the guy as I pulled out of the parking lot, and after a few minutes, I pulled over and called Jean. She was still up and hanging out with my other friends, and I told them all what had happened. I was too keyed up to go back to sleep, so I made for Albuquerque, about 4 hours or so away by Chris's MapQuest search that he did on his laptop for me. On the way there, I stopped once for coffee and gas, but there wasn't a lot of traffic on Interstate 40. I was trying to calm myself down and reassure myself that it was probably just security that looked in on me, and then they got scared when I screamed. But suddenly, a car behind me came up with its brights on. They were right in my side view mirror, and I had to dodge my head over to get the light out of my eyes. Whoever this was stayed behind me for about 5 miles, and by that time I was yelling out curse words and telling him to turn his effing brights off. I slowed down, and the car slowed down too. I started to pull over to give this person even more room to pass if that's what he wanted to do, so it wasn't an issue, but suddenly the car sped right past me. It was the white car I had seen at the Sonic. I was sure of it. I waited a few minutes and then started driving again, really freaking out. I got out my phone and dialed Jean again, and I was so busy freaking out on her that I didn't notice the white car had slowed down and now I was passing it. The car got behind me again, and of course, on came the brights. Now I was really panicking, and I didn't know what to do. After about 10 minutes of me screaming and crying to Jean, the car again went around me and sped into the distance, and I took the next exit to a Flying J, hoping to throw this person off. There was a police car in the lot, and I went right over to him and blathered out my story. The police officer was very nice and listened to me and asked a lot of questions. Where I was from, where I was going, who I knew was out here, stuff like that. Even down to had I been drinking or doing any drugs. He decided that I hadn't been and suggested I get a room in town. He radioed a description of the car out to all the other officers so they would be aware of what was going on, and he led me to a Holiday Inn, and I got a room after parking in the back. The officer said he'd follow up with me later, and Jean called me back and I told her where I was and then just crashed. I woke up in the morning and called my parents and let them know what was going on. And the officer came to the hotel before he went off shift and said that they hadn't seen anything and that I was probably okay to keep moving. I went to get some food, and when I got back to my truck, on the windshield written in what I think was toothpaste were the words, "Nice try." I freaked the hell out and called the police again. They came out, took pictures of my windshield, and made me do a formal statement. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or what. I called my parents again, and my dad wanted to come and get me, but ended up buying a plane ticket for Jean to fly to Albuquerque and then finish the drive with me. Somewhat calmer, I asked the police officer about a different place to spend the night before driving to Albuquerque, and they said to leave my truck at the Holiday Inn, and then drove me to this quirky little place called the Blue Swallow Motel. Whoever was following me, I just didn't want them to know where I was. Strangely enough, the Blue Swallow Motel was actually pretty cool, and I actually still have some pictures that I took of it before I actually went to bed. I spent the rest of my day sleeping and was planning on getting a ride back to the hotel early in the next morning to get my truck and then driving to meet Jean in the morning. I woke up at about 4, and I was feeling a little better, and the police said that they would take me to my truck, which I was very thankful for. While I was on the phone with them, I looked out the window of my room, and there was that friggin' white car in the parking lot. I didn't freak out this time. I calmly told the police that the car was there, and they said to stay put. But just as if he had heard me, the car lights came on, and it tore out of the parking lot. I wanted out of this so bad at this point and was beyond shaken up. I wanted to either go home or be in San Francisco with my friends. The police came, others were driving around looking for the car and driver, but I insisted I needed to get out of there. A police car followed me for quite a while once I got back on the interstate, and nothing happened for the rest of my drive to Albuquerque. I went to the airport in the morning, Jean got there, and then we drove non-stop to San Francisco. About a week later, I was cleaning out the back of my truck when I found a piece of paper folded up. I thought it was just a piece of garbage for my trip, but I opened it anyway, and inside, written in crude, kid-like letters, was the message, "You got lucky. I have to go home." I ran inside my friend's apartment and showed it to her, and we called the police. There was obviously nothing much they could do about it, but they said they'd let the Tucumcari police know about it. That was the town that I had stopped in New Mexico. They did ask for it, and I gladly gave it to them after taking a picture of it. I didn't want that hanging around. So yeah, that was a messed up drive, and I will never drive cross-country again, even if I'm with people. I'll fly next time. I try not to think about it, but when my mind does wander to those days, I'm terrified as to what that person was planning on doing to me. It's scary to think about it, even to this day. Stalker Truck by Jerriton 1781. The creepiest drive I ever had was back in 2008 when I was moving from Seattle to Washington, D.C. The route was down to Portland, then I-84 to I-80 to I-76 to I-70 to I-270. Immediately heading out of Portland, I passed an old F-100 going very slow. It was in primer black with no license plates. A cool truck, I thought, and didn't really pay it any other mind. I noticed about an hour later that the same truck was a couple of car lengths behind me. Odd. After getting back to some open roads, he disappeared into the distance behind me. That first night, I stopped somewhere in Idaho. Shitty, cheap local motel, and I'm the only one there. I woke up the next morning and parked one spot away from me was that primered black F-100. I took off, continuing my trek southeast. Every single time I stopped for gas, at a rest stop, or get slowed down for traffic, that old Ford showed up in my rearview mirror again. This was bizarre. Nearing the end of Nebraska, I pulled over to get gas and decided to drive one more tank and then stop for the day. I pulled back onto the highway, and Mr. Truck is right there shadowing me again. About 30 minutes later, I realize I'm too tired to get to the end of that tank and decide to stop in the next town just over the border in Iowa. As I was getting off the road, I see that pickup pass on, carrying down the highway. I guess he had more endurance than I did. I woke up the next morning, and you know what's coming. That damn truck is in the hotel parking lot again. Up to this point, I just figured I was driving Hare to his tortoise, and we just happened to be making the same west-east coast trip. Now I had that weird light feeling in my stomach, like something was just off. I asked the clerk when turning in my keys, "What's up with that truck? When did it come in?" She says she wasn't working last night and wasn't sure, and also probably thought I was crazy, which maybe I was. Anyhow, at that point I figured it must be a coincidence, and this has to be a different truck. I mean, there were a lot of F-100s made, and there's bound to be a couple in the country that are primer black running with no plates. As I go to head out, I see the truck turning out of the parking lot in the direction that leads him away from the highway. Couldn't have been the same one from before. The guy didn't turn in his keys, so he was probably staying locally. I get back on the highway. No truck. I run to the end of the tank and get gas and some snacks. I get back on the road, and I merge in two cars in front of a primer black F-100. What the hell? At that point, I decide, screw it. I'm marathoning the rest of the way. It's less than 20 hours, so it shouldn't be so bad, and I don't want to stay at another shitty motel with strange ghost trucks stalking me. The pattern continues with the truck showing up behind me every single time I take a break or get gas or get slowed in traffic. It was dark when I got to the I-70-270 split, and the old headlights are glowing back on the horizon. I know it's him. I wonder if it's going to follow me down 270 and park down the street near my house the next morning when I wake up. Alas, the truck continued on 70, and I never saw it again. Looking back, it was probably a confluence or a coincidence. It still feels really odd to me, though, because it's not like there were a lot of F-100s doing interstate runs in 2008. I also realized that I never got a good look at the driver. Not that there was no driver, but in my memories, all I see is an indistinct human-shaped thing driving an old truck that stalked me for 3,000 miles. Screaming Demons of Hicks Road by Miguel. I'm going to tell you about the time I took Hicks Road in San Jose, and while I'll never do it again. It was getting late, and all I had for company was my car's radio. I had the windows rolled down, which allowed the nice breeze to come through my vehicle and whisk around my ears. I mean, seriously, this was an amazing time for a nice drive. As the hour grew late, I flicked on my high beams and traveled back towards my house, but I decided to take the more scenic route, which was Hicks Road. While on the road, I noticed that my high beams kept reflecting on eyeballs off the road. I just summed it up to be some sort of wildlife, but I was terribly wrong. Nature began to call on my little drive, so I decided to do what any red-blooded American would do in this given situation. I pulled over to the side of the road to take a leak. I got out of my vehicle, left the radio on as well as my lights. That way, if a passing vehicle came by, they wouldn't hit it. As I was standing there doing my business, it really bothered me how silent it was outside. I mean, for all of this wildlife I had spotted on the drive, I didn't even hear crickets. With my lights in the car left on, I noticed that they were reflecting on eyes in the distance. Still, I assumed it was wildlife, but why couldn't I hear anything? While I was standing there, something just didn't feel right, and that's when the smell hit me. I have absolutely no idea what this smell was, but it hit me like a ton of bricks, and it stunk so bad I almost puked all over the ground in front of me. It was the smell of some sort of rotten meat mixed with, like, spoiled milk or something. Once I regained myself, I looked out to the field and all around me. That's when I noticed the number of eyes in the field had nearly tripled, and they were watching me. It was creeping me out, and I was ready to get the hell out of there. That's when I noticed the eyes were actually getting closer. As I struggled to zip up my pants and make sure everything was tucked in, I noticed the eyes were approaching much faster than before. Whatever it was running at me. So I quickly made my way back to my car as fast as I could, banging my knee on the rear fender on my way. I launched into the driver's seat while simultaneously closing the door behind me. The figures were almost to my passenger window, so I made sure to lock my car and rolled the windows up as fast as humanly possible. When my windows were up, I put that baby in drive and floored it. I spun gravel on the side of the road, but my car gained traction and I launched forward. It was at that time that I saw something with a horrible white face slam right up against my passenger side window. Suddenly, I saw a ton more of these things emerge from the field. It wasn't the eyes of wildlife I had been seeing. They were some sort of humanoid creatures. They let out this insane, shrill scream while I was driving away, and they were all running towards my car. I can only imagine what would have happened if I hadn't rolled my windows up, or if I hadn't made it back to my car in time. Don't Drive Tired by One Fast Puerto Rican. In spring break 1997, I was heading out to Houston from Lubbock and looking forward to a nice weekend of doing nothing. With a few stops, the drive normally takes about 8.5 to 9 hours. The plan was to stop in Austin for the night at a good friend's and then head out to Houston, about 2.5 hours away, the next morning. For the record, I was driving an '85 Sentra hatchback. No AC, no cruise control. Thanks, Dad. Due to work commitments, I couldn't leave Lubbock until about 6 p.m. I stopped at a friend's house for a quick bite before hitting the road, and it was now 7. The drive itself was very uneventful until I got to Austin. About 12:30 in the morning, I reached Austin and found a bank of payphones before the era everyone had a cell phone. I called my friend to say, "I'm not tired. Really, I'm just going to make the short drive to Houston." My buddy says, "Are you sure? It's pretty late, man." I say, "Yeah, I'm good. I'll call you in the morning when I'm in H-Town." I hang up, fill up the tank before heading out again. It's now 1 a.m. At 2:30 a.m., I reach Brenham and can barely keep my eyes open. I'm doing every trick in the book. Loud music, window open, slapping face, punching myself. Nothing is working. Just past Brenham on 290 is a combination levee bridge highway designed to keep the freeway high and dry during big floods. The last thing I remember was closing my eyes and opening them suddenly to see my car plunging down the levee with me inside it. I must have been doing between 60 and 70 miles per hour when I went downhill, and luckily the high grass kept me from either overturning or nailing the bottom of the levee. So, I stopped about 15 feet from the bottom of the levee. It's the middle of the night, and no one can see my car down the embankment. No cell phone, no witnesses, car won't start. After a quick check on myself, I got out of the car and stumbled out the driver's side door. I started climbing up the levee to flag down someone to help. Yeah, right. People are just going to stop when they see some Mexican-looking fellow waving his arms in the middle of nowhere at 2:45 in the morning. Finally, an 18-wheeler stopped and I borrowed his cell phone. I called my dad, who was unsure of what to do. "Thanks, Pop." But then I called a wrecker to pull my car out. The trucker offered to wait until the wrecker arrived, but I got really creeped out just sitting there, so I said, "Yeah, I'm good. I'll just wait by the side of the road." The trucker left, and I was all alone again. After a few minutes, I realized that I'll probably be waiting for an hour for the wrecker, so I decided to get back in my car and see if I can't throw it in reverse. Not sure if I had an angel on my shoulder, but the car fired right up. As I threw it into reverse, it truly felt like a Christmas miracle. All the way up the embankment, I drove backwards and made it to the top by the side of the freeway. Got out and checked around. Wheels? Okay. Body damage? Nothing too noticeable. Engine? Looks like the underneath of a lawnmower, but it all looks okay. Belts are still belting. Let's go. I put it in first gear and I heard a wobble from the wheels. Not sure what it was, but nothing's going to stop me from making it to Houston, damn it. My top speed after the accident was about 40 miles an hour. I reached my parents' house at about 5 in the morning. Tired, sore, and still a bit in shock, I told my parents what happened before I collapsed in my bed. When I woke up sometime around noon, I went to survey the damage. I had completely stripped 2 of the 4 lugs off the right wheel and 1 lug off the left wheel. I'm damn lucky that 1 or both wheels didn't fly off the car after my accident. I also realized that if I had gone off 15 seconds later, my car probably would have been upside down in that creek. So, yeah, never pass up a chance to sleep during a long road trip. Bad Neighborhood, submitted by Razor Rod. Many moons ago, on Thanksgiving, my wife and I were going to spend the holiday at her sister's house with her extended family in Collinsville, Illinois. We lived outside of Kansas City, Missouri, and we were just going to make the drive over. The problem was, we both had to work late Thanksgiving Eve at our jobs. Yeah, you'd think that very cool employers would let people out a little early, but not so for us, at least not back then. So, after we got our things together, got our dogs in our RAV4 and started to shove off on the 4-hour drive, we didn't leave until about 8 p.m. We could have waited until the morning, but we didn't want to travel on the holiday. We just wanted to wake up with our family and enjoy the day's festivities. I drove for the first couple of hours, and let my wife spell me at the wheel afterwards, as she was more familiar with the drive over through St. Louis. I kind of drifted off slightly, remembering that there was a funny jog we needed to take off I-70 to get to a bridge to get into Illinois. If you're from the area, I'm talking about the McKinley Bridge. So it was about an hour or so after I conked out that my wife asked me to wake up and help her remember to get off at the right place. As I mentioned, it's a quick turnaround to get onto McKinley Street and then the bridge. But unfortunately, by the time she woke me up, she was already off I-70 and now driving through neighborhoods. Having made this trip with her more than once, but again not as familiar with the territory, I just said, "Honey, this doesn't look right at all." She said, "I know. I don't know where to turn though." Guys, this is before GPS and smartphones. Yeah, we had a road map, but we were in a residential area, and as I was fumbling to grab the map, I kept asking her to tell me what streets she was passing. It was late, we were both tired, and she was getting frustrated with me because I couldn't give her immediate directions as to where to go. I finally told her to pull over as soon as she could, and she got to the next cross street. I needed to figure out where the fuck we were, and in the back of my mind I was thinking, what a great way to start out Thanksgiving. My wife's pissed off at me for something I didn't even do. When she stopped, I turned on the overhead light in our SUV to get an idea of where we were. I took a quick look around and we were at the corner of North 20th Street and Penrose. I don't like to look down on people, but this neighborhood looked pretty sketch, and as I mentioned, yeah, it was late. So I tried to look at the map and figure out where we needed to go to get to McKinley Street and the bridge. It looked like a straight shot down Penrose to North 11th Street, so I told my wife that, and she said okay, finally starting to calm down a bit. I looked back at our dogs who were still asleep in the back and gave a soft laugh and said, "Hey, sometimes you have to go off the beaten path for a more interesting trip." Looking back, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. No sooner than I had said that, than the back of our RAV4 dipped, and there was a tap on the glass of the driver's side door. My wife had been looking at me as I'd been looking at the map, and we both turned at the same time to see a guy in dark clothing tapping with what looked like a gun on the window. I looked closer, and in fact, it didn't just look like a gun. It was a gun. My wife screamed, and I told her to just floor it. For whatever reason, she froze, and the guy hauled his hand back with the gun, and I thought he was going to punch the glass with it if we didn't leave. Somehow, my wife got herself back into reality, put the RAV4 into drive, and stepped on the gas. We heard some muffled yelling, but we didn't care. My wife was hysterical at this point, and I was trying to reassure her that it was okay. We just needed to get out of this neighborhood. I told her,
no cop, no stop. Just get to North 11th Street and make a right. She didn't want to at first and wanted to stop at every intersection, but I just yelled at her to get the fuck out of here. We kept hearing this muffled yelling, and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. But when we finally got to North 11th Street, my wife did come to a complete stop. Suddenly, the back of the RAV4 bounced again, and I spun around to see a man standing behind our vehicle holding a gun. We heard him yell, "You dumb motherfuckers! You tried to kill me!" Apparently, he had stepped onto the back of our RAV4 and for the last few blocks as we sped out of that place, had been holding onto the spare wheel mounted on the back. I told my wife, "Go!" She hit the gas, and we tore back to the big intersection where we needed to make a left to finally get to the McKinley Bridge. To say we were shook up is an understatement. My wife was crying at this point, and the dogs had started freaking out after the guy was yelling, and of course the commotion of us speeding around. But we got out of there unscathed. We made it over the bridge into Illinois and finally to Collinsville. When we pulled into my sister-in-law's driveway, it was just after midnight. I herded the dogs inside while my wife ran in ahead of me. I went back for our bags while she told her family, who was still awake having drinks and just sitting around talking, about what had just happened. My father-in-law kind of snickered when he heard that we had just been driving around late at night in Hyde Park, what we found out was a really bad neighborhood of St. Louis. My wife hadn't yet gotten to the part about the guns, and when she did, the laughter stopped. Everyone got really serious and was very happy that we got out of there okay and didn't get into more trouble. We ended up having an awesome Thanksgiving, but the buzz for the next 2 days was all about our wayward trip into what I would later find out was truly a very dangerous neighborhood. These days, I'm so thankful for the technology we have when we're driving so as to avoid neighborhoods like that. And on top of that, my wife and I have made a deal that we will no longer make trips at night, only during the day. Stalked on the Back Roads by Crimson. A little background. I was about 8 when my mother, little sister, and I were taking a road trip across Wyoming. This wasn't unusual, as we had family living all across the state, and my mom loved piling us in the car and driving. My memory of this event is patchy, but I remember it more for the way my mom reacted than for the event itself. I don't remember exactly where this was or where we were headed, but anyone who has ever driven through Wyoming knows that the roads are mostly deserted. We'd been driving several hours behind an older green and white truck. We were approaching a gas station, and I remember my little sister being so excited because she wanted to get those little bottles made of wax that had juice in them. The green and white truck pulled into the gas station, and we followed. We used the restrooms, got some snacks, my mom filled us up with gas, and we got back into the car and back onto the road. A little time passed, and my mom asked, "Is that truck behind us the same one that we followed into the gas station?" I turned in my seat and confirmed that it was the same truck. I sat back down and continued gorging myself on snacks, but I sensed that my mom was uneasy. She kept looking in her rearview mirror and watching that truck. It was a long drive to the next gas station, and along the way, the truck behind us would speed up and get dangerously close to us, and then back away a little. After a stretch of several miles, we were nearing another gas station. My mom adjusted her mirror so she could see us in the back seat. She said, "I'm going to pull into this gas station and open my door like I'm getting out. I don't want you two to open your doors. Don't get out. Just sit tight and hang on." My little sister and I looked at each other like, "Okay." I thought it was strange, but the look in her eyes scared me a little. My mom is a calm person, but she has this presence about her that makes you aware that she isn't to be messed with. All of my friends throughout the years have been more than a little scared of her, which is odd considering she's just over 5 feet tall and about 100 pounds. Anyway, we pulled into the station and up to a pump. My mom adjusted her mirror to see behind us and opened her door with the car still running. The green and white truck pulled in and parked just to the side of the turn-in. The driver popped his hood, got out, came around to the front of his truck, and propped up his hood. He started messing around under the hood with his back to us, and from what I remember of him, he was a really big guy, but who isn't to an 8-year-old girl? My mom slammed her door and peeled out of the gas station. I turned in my seat to watch the man. He turned around like he was startled, looked right at us, quickly closed his hood, even though he had only been looking in there for a few seconds. At this point, my mom is driving so fast that I lose sight of him. I was terrified, and I knew it must be serious for my mom to drive like this. Up ahead, the road bent sharply to the left, and there was a small road to the right of a few buildings. Just before the bend, my mom slammed on the brakes, pulled the steering wheel all the way to the right, and, as if it were straight out of an action movie, slides around the corner. She sped through the small parking lot of one of the buildings and parked it. From our vantage point, we were hidden from traffic behind us, but we could see anyone passing. A short time later, we watched the green and white truck speed right past us and around the bend in the road. Obviously, my sister and I were very shaken up. My mom asked if we needed to use the restroom, and we said yes. She said she did too, but we would wait here for a bit and then make our way to the next station. I'll never forget what she said next, because it was so out of character for her. She said, "I'd rather piss my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of the road." A little time passed, and we got back on the road, and we continued on our trip. We never saw that truck again. The Forest Road, submitted by Funky Boss Carl. My friends and I had decided to do some fishing on the Coosa River in Alabama last summer, and this would be 2018 for those that care. Not the main river that runs into Jordan Lake, but closer to Hatchet Creek, maybe a couple of miles over the river from Higgins Ferry. There was me, Joey, and Marty. My name is Carl for reference. It was a nice hot day. We were just out for some crappie, bass, and channel cat. We brought along plenty of gear, sandwiches, and water, and Bud Light. We were having a blast catching, or in some cases not catching anything, the latter for Marty, but we were still enjoying the day, fishing and just hanging out. I remember at one point thinking that we were being watched, but I'm not a superstitious guy. I shrugged it off and just figured there were other people out fishing and maybe walking behind us in the woods. We had walked down a path where we had left my Jeep and then had to trek through a bunch of trees to get to the river at a point where there were some rocks at the edge of the trees. Where we were, there was no beaches or anything like that. In short, it's just the middle of nowhere. We stopped fishing to have some lunch and relax in the shade, and I brought up the fact that I thought I heard somebody else walking around in the woods. And Marty, the guy who wasn't catching anything, said, "Yeah, I thought I heard something too, but who knows? Could be anything. There's tons of animals out here, you know that. And even if it wasn't animals, it could just be other folks out for a hike, or maybe they're fishing too." I lit up a smoke and said, "Yeah, you're probably right then." We continued to fish for the rest of the afternoon, and when it started to get dark, we talked about heading home. Joey came from a pretty shitty family and didn't really want to go home right away, and he suggested that maybe we just go on a drive through the back roads for a while, until it got dark. We all knew about his family, and the three of us were really close, so I figured, what the hell, I drove, we've got more buds than we need, so why don't we just have a slow cruise through the woods? It was then about 7 p.m., and while the sun doesn't set until around 8 at that time of the year, when you're out in the woods, things get darker a heck of a lot faster. I'm pretty sure anybody who spends time outside knows this. So we packed up our gear and got back to my Jeep Wrangler and loaded up. Everyone took a pause that refreshes, and I remember firing up a smoke, still getting that weird feeling that something was a little off on this day. We jumped in the Jeep. I put on some Holiday Gunfire, a pretty cool band from Birmingham that my older brother had turned me on to. A quick sidebar. They're a really cool band. You should check them out. I began driving back to where the dirt path turned into a more civilized road. Then I started looking for some of the other off-road paths. When I say off-road, I mean just dirt paths, not like crazy mudding paths. We were just driving along, having a few smokes and beers, and as it got darker and darker, I had to turn the lights on. We were driving for a little while longer, and it came to a dead end in another dirt road. We all stopped to have another pause that refreshes before turning around. And again, I got that weird feeling that something just wasn't right, but I didn't mention it to the other guys. It was then that I suggested we head home for Clanton, something to eat and maybe another beer or two at a bar. Everyone agreed, and I started to turn my Jeep around to make the trip back. It was now pitch black out there as we made our way down the path we had just come. All of a sudden, Marty, who was riding shotgun, said, "Hey, what is that?" I hadn't seen it yet, but suddenly I did. I slowed down, and that's when all three of us saw that there was a rope or some kind of cord strung across the path between two trees. Hanging from the rope were the severed heads of 3 or 4 possums and a couple of raccoons. Those were certainly not there when we first came through. I mean, how the hell would we have driven right by that and not seen it? It was high enough that I could get under it, and we slowly did so while Marty was taking a video of it on his phone. I would share that with you, but unfortunately Marty no longer has that phone after it fell into a pool and he lost all of his data. Anyway, we were kind of shaken up. I mean, who wouldn't be? We were freaked out, and I picked up the pace and got back to the highway and headed south for a freeway to get back home. I couldn't stop talking about what we had just seen, and I assure you, this was not something out of a few Bud Lights that we had. Someone had to have been following us for whatever reason and hung those heads to make sure that we would see them. Of course, it could have been just a prank, and I don't want to go too deep into what might have been happening out there, but it was still totally strange and totally random. We actually went back the following week, but the heads were gone and there was no rope or whatever hanging between the trees. That makes us think that whatever or whoever did that did it deliberately to scare us. All I can say to whoever was out there that did that in an attempt to freak us out? Hey, mission accomplished. You Are Gonna Die by Fumscappy. One night, I was out getting gas, and after I left, I pulled up to a red light behind a beater car, and we were both turning right onto a 2-lane highway. We both make the right, and his car doesn't go very fast, so I head for the left lane. He blocks me. I headed for the right lane. He immediately killed his signal and cut me off again. This continued for a little while before I got annoyed, so I gun it and go to pass him. Again, while in the process of passing, this guy takes a dive at my car, which slows me down. He's yelling at me out his window, "You aren't passing me, motherfucker!" And he's laughing maniacally. We got caught at another light, and he started chucking stuff at my car. I checked the traffic and gunned it through the red light. I'm sufficiently creeped out now. His car seems to be faster than I initially thought, and he's keeping up with me through traffic. In desperation, I started turning off side streets, and he was following me. We got to another light, and I asked what his problem is, and he screams, literally screams at me, "You are gonna die tonight!" Holy fuck. So I chuck an old coffee into his car, turn off my lights, and take the fuck off as fast as I could go. At this point, stoplights aren't a concern anymore. I want to be pulled over. I'm ripping through little towns at 100 miles an hour in 25 and 30 mile an hour zones. I was starting to lose him. I finally ducked into a side street and somehow found a driveway that was next to a garage. I pulled up next to it, turned off the lights with the car still on, and waited. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. I finally got home about 45 minutes later, white as a ghost. I called the police. I didn't have my cell at the time, and I reported this guy in. I never found out if anything happened, and I never saw that car or guy again. But I literally thought I was going to be murdered. For nothing. How did this happen? Submitted by Anonymous. Hey, Uncle Josh. I'm sending you this story, and I would like to remain anonymous. It's a very strange but embarrassing story that I haven't told anyone other than my family. I think you'll see why as the story goes along, if you so choose to read it. I was encouraged to share my story because I have just watched a show on the History Channel about something very similar that happened to me. Not to the extent of what happened to that guy, but There is this strange gap in time that I can't explain, and neither can my family. I'm in my early 30s, and I work for my father. I have since high school. He's owned a number of businesses, and still does. One of them includes transportation of vehicles and trailers. This also includes mobile homes and things like that. Basically, when he makes a purchase or a sale, I drive a flatbed or whatever truck is needed to move whatever merchandise he needs to have moved. It could be a car, it could be a camper, it could be whatever comes down the pipeline that we can transport. Concerning the story that I'm sending you, I had to drive a vehicle from our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia to Brookhaven, West Virginia. Not a problem. Got in the truck, loaded things up, and took off. When I got to the final stop, my father called and said he got a sweet deal on a Range Rover for a customer, but it was located outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He wanted me to continue heading north to pick up the Range Rover and then bring it back to Atlanta. At this time, it was a Thursday afternoon around 2:30. He told me that while he knew it wasn't the original plan, and I did have some pretty serious plans with friends that weekend, we were actually heading to the coast to do some deep-sea fishing. He apologized, but said he really needed me to do this, and what's a devoted son going to do? Of course I said yes. I thought I could make the trip back that night if I left at a decent time. Getting to Pittsburgh was only about an hour and a half away from where I was in West Virginia. So if I left at 4 and really made good time, I could probably get back to Atlanta at 2 or 3 in the morning. My dad told me because he was doing this, he was going to give me Friday off to get ready for my trip. And you know what? I thought that was a deal and a half. I got the address and the name of the guy who was selling us the Range Rover, and off north I went. The load-up was a snap, and I was on my way a little after 4 p.m. As the term goes, I was southbound and down. Before I shoved off, I loaded up on Mountain Dew and snacks. Very rare for me as I'm kind of a fitness nut, but I thought the caffeine would help me make the trip. It was uneventful, and as I continued on, I didn't have to stop for gas until about 5 hours later, and I got off 77 to fuel up in a town called Bland, Virginia. I walked around for a little bit to stretch my legs, and I noticed a strange light in the sky. I should mention that this was in August and the skies were clear. Lots of stars out that night, but this one was shining brighter than the others. I just thought maybe a comet or something. I just got some more food and drinks and headed back on the road. Now here's where the weird part starts. As I got onto the ramp to get back onto 77, I noticed that the light in the sky that I had noticed earlier was now much bigger. I remember that there weren't that many people on the interstate at that time, but I paid no mind to it, just thinking about the cool trip that we were going to go on that weekend. I was so ready to hit the ocean. It was a bunch of my high school friends getting back together, and that's really what was preoccupying my brain. So, again, southbound and down, moving as fast as I could, but also knowing that I had an extremely expensive vehicle on my flatbed. Every once in a while, I would look out my driver's side window and see that light still seemed to be getting bigger. This is going to sound corny, but the first thing that I thought of was my Sunday school teachings and the star in the sky that had everyone going to see Jesus. If I recall correctly, it's the Star of Bethlehem. I know it's kind of dumb, but I'm just saying what I first thought of. I kept on going and everything was moving smoothly. I glanced over again, and the light was even brighter this time, and I wondered if anyone else on the road was seeing what I was seeing. Just before the North Carolina border, my check engine light came on, and my heart sank. I pulled over on the shoulder of the road to see if it was something simple, because with this truck that I've been driving, sometimes things like this happen from time to time. It was a sturdy Ford, but once in a while would act up. I had to remind myself of that. So I popped the hood, got out, and went and checked all the belts, fluids, all that kind of stuff to see if anything was wrong. There didn't seem to be any issue. Nothing smelled funny, nothing seemed off. The truck was operating fine. As far as I could tell, it was tip-top. I got back into the cab, and that's when I noticed a light on the highway up ahead of me. But it wasn't in the sky. It looked like a spotlight on a stage. I'm sure your listeners are already thinking this guy is out of his head, but I could not be more serious than I am right now. This white light came straight towards my truck, and in seconds my entire vehicle was bathed in this gigantic bright light. I strained my neck after rolling down the window to see what the heck was going on. I kind of freaked out, so I just put it in drive and started going like a madman back down 77. Now, I said what got weird back then, but this is where it gets really screwed up. I have zero recollection of driving through North Carolina. I don't remember going through Charlotte or getting onto 85. From where I was when I saw that light, I probably had another 5 hours and change to go to get to Atlanta, so it should have been around 2 or 3 in the morning when I got there. It wasn't. I rolled into the lot of my father's business at 10 p.m. That's what the clock in the truck read. That's what my watch said. That's what the little neon clock that hangs over the door to my father's office said. I sat there dumbfounded for at least 10 minutes. I didn't know what to do. I called my dad and said, "Hey, I'm here." And he was as flabbergasted as me. He said, "What do you mean you're here?" And I said, "I'm at the shop. I've got the Range Rover." There was a long pause on the phone, and he said, "Son, that's impossible." I just said, "Dad, I'm here." And again, he was silent, and he said, "Son, if you're pulling my leg, I'm going to beat your ass." Then he said he would be down in a few minutes. I sat in my truck in a daze, wondering what the hell had happened. I had the manifest right next to me. 4:07 p.m., Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. A 10 to 11 hour trip, yet here I was just 6 hours later. My dad finally got there and got out of his truck. He didn't know what to say. I hopped out and waved him over to check the Range Rover, and he stepped forward but then stopped. I asked what was wrong, and he asked if I'd been smoking reefer. I said I hadn't. Why? He said I just smelled like burnt cinnamon or something, then finally walked over closer. He looked at the Range Rover, looked at me, and then grabbed me by the elbow gently and said, "Are you okay, son?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm fine." I then remembered about the bright light and told him about it, and he just shook his head. He just said, "All right, let's unload this guy and then head for home." I was happy to hear that, let me tell you. We took care of business, and he asked me to come back to my family's house for the night rather than my apartment. He said that we'd come back the next day to grab my pickup. I was really happy because I was really tired for some reason, and on top of it, I was confused. I just agreed and followed my dad's lead. When we got back to my childhood home, my mom was awake and making food. I'm a Polish guy, and Polish moms make food for any reason, especially when they're worried. So I washed up and sat down to pierogi and kielbasa with my mom and dad and recapped the night. They were both wigged out, but I could tell they knew I was telling the truth about my drive in this lost period of time. My mom made me take off my t-shirt and pants as she said she couldn't stand the smell of this cinnamon scorch or whatever it was that was on them. So I took a shower to see if that lessened the smell. After a bit, I crawled into my living room and crashed on the couch to watch Chips reruns before I fell asleep. I know there's no super cool holy shit moment to this story, and the ending might sound lame, but that's really what happened to me. I cannot explain how I made up or lost that time on my way to Atlanta. It never happened again, and I really hope it doesn't. Anyone out there in podcast land got any ideas? I'm all ears to listen to what you think might have happened.